Single sign-on. So I mentioned this before, so SSO. You've probably heard about SSO before. You might not know exactly what it is, but this is by far the first thing that enterprise customers will ask you for. And I mentioned that SMBs requiring this. This is actually what they'll ask for too. So let's talk about SSO. So what is SSO? So SSO enables end users to sign in to your application with a single password and identity broker, instead of every app having its own password and its own system. So you can think about this as like a shared identity across all different systems. If you've used like Google Sign-In is effectively a form of single sign-on, but there's many different identity systems that are out there. So single sign-on, you'll need to plug into the identity system used by this end enterprise company. This is really a deal breaker for enterprise customers. It's the first thing they'll require, and if you don't have this, literally you can't sell to them. I've seen huge deals just blocked by this one feature. It's also now required by many SMBs, and the reason why is these smaller companies having requirements around security, compliance, or just end user usability. You don't want to have to maintain passwords across many different services. Plug into one SSO solution. Some common protocols that you might have seen are things like SAML or OpenID. ADFS is one by Microsoft. So there's a bunch of different protocols actually doing the authentication. And you've probably seen this before. If you use Slack, this is really common that you can connect to Slack. So usually with Slack, you can sign in with an email and password. You can sign in with Google. Here, Slack is configured to sign in with Okta. So Okta is one of the identity systems that an enterprise company might use. The problem here is that this is really fragmented. So there's a ton of different identity systems and protocols. So you can't just build it once. It requires literally years of ongoing development to get right. Stack Overflow just actually published a blog post. We'll post these slides later so you can grab the link. But at Stack Overflow, it took 3 engineers 3 months just to build Okta, just Okta, which is one of the identity systems that you might integrate with. So this is a tremendous amount of engineering work to do this. And what this results in is brittle integrations and really frustrated enterprise admins. You'll be building this in step with trying to deploy to them. It'll break, it'll break with your biggest potential deals in your, the direction you want to take your business. And that's really a bad look. So there's a bunch of different authentication systems and identity systems that are here. There's literally hundreds of identity systems out there. I feel like I discover a new one every month. So this is really challenging. Okay, so how do we solve this? So, our solution, we looked at this and we said, hey, what if you took your application and instead of you building with all the different identity systems and you as a developer having to connect to all these things, we just run this as middleware for you. And so what your application does is connects to WorkOS. In WorkOS, the way that you connect to us is with a really simple protocol that's easy to connect. And then we actually handle the authentication with all these different identity systems. So you plug it in once and you get everything out of the box. And we keep adding identity systems to this literally every month. There's new ones that we plug into, new ones we make sure it works. It's very similar again to Stripe. With Stripe, you plug it in once and you get Visa, MasterCard, Alipay, all these different payment systems, different countries, they keep adding. We're the same thing, but for identity systems. So let's go back to that example for your application. And we're going to use an example here as we go through the talk to illustrate how easy it is to actually integrate WorkOS with a product. So imagine you're building this app. Remember, this is like a wiki tool. We're going to call this Memex. So imagine this as being a wiki tool that you've built, knowledge sharing tool. We've actually built this as a demo app that we'll show. It looks like this. It's just kind of a simple document editor. So we'll go through Memex. So as a first example here, let's add single sign-on to Memex. So actually, let's see what it's like to integrate WorkOS SSO. And for that, I will hand this over to Taylor, who's a developer success engineer on our team, to walk us through it.
All right, thank you so much, Michael. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Taylor. I'm a developer success engineer here at WorkOS. And today, what we're going to do is we're going to have a brief overview covering what it takes to integrate WorkOS single sign-on into an application like Memex. And then we're going to walk through actually integrating single sign-on into Memex and authenticating our first Okta user. So to start, integrating SSO into an application like Memex is extremely easy. The developer experience is pleasant and it's fast. We see developers move from their first dashboard login to authenticating their first user from an IDP like Okta in less than 1 hour. It's exceptional and it's wonderful, and it's because ultimately this integration is oAuth. If you're familiar with oAuth and you know oAuth, then you understand and you know WorkOS. So what does that mean? Ultimately, this integration follows a 3-step process. The first step is going to be adding the authentication route to our application. And this is going to be the location of the identity provider that your user is directed to for authentication. Number 2, we're going to add a callback route. And this is going to be a location within this case, within Memex, that our user is redirected to after they've successfully authenticated, in this case with Okta. And then third and final step is we're going to create our user's session. In this case, it's going to entail exchanging a code for an authentication token and a user profile. And then we're going to set up our user session information with the information contained within that profile. And it's worth sort of pausing and noting here that we offer a variety of framework agnostic and native SDKs, such as languages like Python, Rails, Go, Node, PHP. Pardon me, I said Rails. We have it's framework agnostic, so we're actually covering Ruby. Rails is included in that. PHP, Laravel, and we're constantly expanding those native offerings as well. Soon we're going to be supporting languages like Elixir, Clojure, .NET, and Java. So no matter what you're building in or how you're building, we're going to have you covered. And so with that, let's take a closer look at each of these 3 steps required for integration. So step 1 here is to add our authentication route. And essentially what we're doing here is constructing a class that's going to set up this authorize endpoint. And we're going to have this endpoint redirect to an authorization URL that we are generating using this convenience method from the WorkOS SDK called authorization URL, uncannily enough. And in this case, this method is going to require 3 parameters. The first being the domain for this user, which we're going to grab from their the authenticating user's email address. 2, this requires a project ID, which is going to be found in your WorkOS dashboard. And this is going to act as the oAuth client ID and as a public identifier for our application. And third, this requires a redirect URI, which is going to be a location that the user is sent to after authenticating. And in our case, this will be our callback route, which we're going to set up in step 2. And so similar to our authorization route, we're going to go ahead and construct this class for our callback endpoint. And we're going to begin by setting up our profile using another convenience method from the WorkOS Ruby SDK, in this case, aptly named profile. And in that case, we're going to grab the code from the URL parameters that we've received and exchange that code for our authorization token and our user profile, which we're actually going to use in step 3. So for step 3, we're going to create our user session. And we're going to do this by retrieving the profile info from the profile object that we retrieved in step 2, and set that up, sign our user in, and then redirect them back to our application. And so with that overview, we can see it's quick. This is fast and a lightweight, pleasant experience. So let's go ahead and walk through integrating single sign-on, specifically with Okta SAML, into Memex. All right, so in this case, I'm going to share my screen. All right, so here you can see we're going to go ahead and hit our login form for Memex, and we can see normal behavior. So I can come here I can sign in with normal username and password, and I'm back to my Memex homepage. But we don't want username and password, right? We want Okta. We want single sign-on with Okta. So let's go ahead and head out of here and move on over to our dashboard in WorkOS. And once we land here, we are going to head on over to get started with single sign-on. And here we're actually directed to essentially what is an easy single sign-on setup wizard. So we have very clear, quick, easy steps to begin setting up single sign-on and to get your users integrated immediately. For our first step here, you can see all of our natively supported SDKs. And if we click through here, you can see that we actually dynamically provide and update code samples based on whatever language you are building with. In our case, Memex is built using Ruby. So we're going to go ahead and move forward here. And we've actually gone ahead and we've installed our gem, we've set up our initializer and everything like that. So we're going to go ahead on to step 2 and configure our redirect URIs. In this case, this is going to be our callback endpoint for Memex. Went ahead and pre-populated that field, and we're going to go ahead and check step 2 as complete and add that URI. And this is really where most of the integration is going to take place. As you can see here, we actually provide you with quick and easy copy and pastable code samples for each of these routes. So you just have to drop these into your backend and you can begin authenticating. As a matter of fact, we can peek behind the curtain here. And this is actually the SSO controller that's live and deployed for Memex. So you can see we've checked all of our boxes, we've moved through each of these steps, and we have each of our routes set up and ready to go. So we'll move to our next step, which is to configure our identity provider. And here we actually offer you the ability to move through documentation, to configure an IDP, but we actually go one step further in step 5. So in this case, we don't want to follow this Okta setup guide. What we're actually going to do is move on to step 5 and test single sign-on. So what we're doing in step 5 is really special. What we're doing here is we're actually provisioning an Okta account and an Okta user and an Okta application so that way you're able to test this integration end to end and successfully authenticate a user with Okta without ever leaving the dashboard. And this is especially wonderful because to just take it from me, you don't have to get on a call with an Okta sales rep to get their spiel. You don't have to sign an Okta contract for a developer plan. We've handled all that. We've gone through the legwork. All you have to do is sign in. So what we're going to do here is we're going to go ahead and find our password. We're going to select our redirect URI, and then we're going to log in with our account. So as you can see, we're immediately redirected to Okta to access Memex. We can come here and enter our Okta username that WorkOS has provisioned, enter our password. And voila, we're right back to Memex, having successfully authenticated with Okta. And also to demonstrate that this is live and working for our application as well, I can come back here, use my Memex login form as a service provider, enter my credentials. And voila, because I've already authenticated in that first instance, I would just bounce to Okta, my session was stored, and then I was redirected right back to Memex. And that's it, it's that easy. You'll notice there's no interstitial login screens, there's no branded components, no visible redirect URLs. This is UX for authentication is completely controlled by the developer. And this is a fully white labeled experience. It's completely seamless from any authenticating user's perspective. And I just want to emphasize as well that this is the same regardless of IDP. So whether you're authenticating with Okta, Azure AD, Ping One, Ping Federate, G Suite, One Login, the list goes on, this is going to be seamless across the board. And that's it. That's all it takes. All it takes. Less than 21 lines of code, and we are able to authenticate users using Okta SAML using WorkOS. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. And with that, I look forward to speaking with you all. And I'll turn it back over to Michael.
All right, thanks a lot, Taylor. So that is WorkOS SSO. So we've actually spent a lot of time working on this to make it that simple. There's an incredible amount of complexity under the hood. But what WorkOS SSO effectively does is makes it extraordinarily easy to add this to your app. I think the current time record of somebody integrating is like 43 minutes end to end, and then they were able to authenticate SAML users. So this is just oAuth to your app. It's compatible with all different identity systems out there, and literally saves months of engineering time. And we really hope that this is the first feature that can unlock just a handful of enterprise deals for really any company. It's also a security feature. It also increases retention and engagement and all this stuff. So we definitely encourage you to check out our docs and start integrating.